This story that I am about to tell you happened to my family in 1982. We live outside of Kettering, Ohio in an old 4-bedroom house that has a bit of property out back. Not only did I see what I thought for years was a werewolf, but my children saw it too. And then, so did my wife a little while later. This was the only time we ever saw that thing, but thinking about it even now chills me to the bone. My name is James Olson, but everyone calls me Jimmy. When this encounter happened, I was 29 years old. Been married for 10 years and had 2 little ones. They were 8 and 7 at the time. I worked at a grocery store as a general manager, and my wife was a large animal veterinarian. And that's why she wasn't actually home when we first saw this thing. We're a Catholic family. Don't believe in creatures like this unless you read the Revelation and consider this the end times. When this thing made itself known, I was in the kitchen cooking supper, like I did every night that my wife had to work. This particular evening, she was down at a neighbor's ranch tending to their sick horse. It was about 5 or 5:30 in the afternoon. The sun was still up, but she was getting ready to go down in about an hour. I had the windows in the kitchen open so I could hear the kids outside. They were playing in the front yard of our house, like they always did. Our house is about 15, maybe 20 minutes from anyone else. The closest neighbor is actually the ranch that my wife was working at. We got the property from Cindy's uncle, who had willed it to us when he passed. It was a quiet place most of the time. That's why I didn't have a problem letting the kids be outside by themselves. We had a dog, too, a big collie named Sam, short for Samantha. For some reason, she wasn't out there with the kids that day. She was laying in one of the bedrooms, minding her own business. My kids were outdoor kids, like I was, like my wife was. Smart and cautious with nature. They knew not to wander off alone, or pester any of the critters that were out there with them. They knew the difference between their species of snakes, and which animals should be given a wide girth. This is the reason I knew something was out there that shouldn't have been. Something out of the ordinary was definitely going on. They came in screaming about a monster. They banged through the screen door hard enough to have it slam into the wall. My oldest, Kathy, was dragging the little one, Jessica, by the arm, and they were both hollering and crying at the top of their lungs for me. They were in tears, so naturally I ran to them, trying to calm them down and asking what was going on. They kept saying something about a monster outside. It was watching them from the side of the house. Jessica was too shaken up to tell me what they actually saw, but Kathy told me it looked like a really tall wolf that was on 2 legs and had glowing eyes. She said it was on the side of the house and was peeking around the corner watching them. It was taller than you, Daddy, and it looked really mean. They got really scared that it was going to attack them, and that's when they ran into the house. When they ran, the monster, or whatever it was, ducked back around the corner and disappeared. I asked if it was a wolf. They told me no. I asked if it was a coyote. They told me no. I asked if it was a bear, even though we hadn't seen any around there. I didn't cancel out the possibility that there could be one in the area. Kathy just kept saying it was too tall to be any of those things, and Jessica just kept crying that it was a monster. I told her monsters didn't exist, but she was beyond reason at this point. I heard a loud bang coming from outside, behind the house, not on the side where the girls saw this beast. They started crying again, and said this monster was there. I felt I needed to check it out, just to be on the safe side. Like I said, my girls knew how to identify an animal, and if it was something out there that they couldn't identify, I needed to figure out what it was. I grabbed my rifle just to be safe. I was positive they did see some kind of animal, but I didn't think Kathy was describing it accurately. Boy, was I wrong. I made the girls stay inside while I went out there. They were both upset that I was going and wanted me to just stay inside, but I had to make sure it wasn't a wolf or a coyote looking for an easy meal. I tried to get Samantha to come out of the bedroom and go with me, but she seemed really frightened, and later I found out she actually urinated on herself, and underneath the bed. So I went outside, and I immediately noticed there was no wildlife making any noise around the house. Usually, we have a ton of crickets and birds and other critters making noise, but right at that moment, there was nothing. I started heading over to the side of the house where they say they saw the animal, but as I did, this enormous wolf-like creature came around the side and looked right at me and snarled. Its mouth were full of these sharp teeth, and I could actually see the foam and the slobber hanging off of its mouth. I stopped dead in my tracks. This thing looked like a wolf, but gave off the presence of pure evil, and it was way too big. It had this expression on its face that looked like malice. It was like it was expecting the girls to come back out of the house, not a full-grown adult. It seemed like it was irritated and put off. It was on all fours at the time, but it was still chest level to me. I'd never seen anything so big, or anything that looked like this creature. It was covered in dark brown fur, and the fur was shiny, like it was a healthy coat. Its head was bigger than any wolf's head that I've ever seen, and the shoulders were broad and muscular. It looked like the neck was muscular too. It had big canine ears that had these little tufts of hair on the tips, and it really did look like the eyes were glowing. They were a yellow sort of color. The paws on the front of the legs looked unnatural, like a raccoon instead of a wolf. It had prominent fingers and claws, but the back paws looked normal to me. At this point, it was about 30 feet away from me, maybe a little bit more, but with the anatomy of this thing, it looked like it could cover that ground in a flash. It was walking very slowly towards me, like it was stalking me. It never took its eyes off me. It kept making this low, growling noise, but it was so deep that it didn't sound natural. It sounded like a rumble. I kept backing up as it approached. I was slowly going backwards towards the house, and I aimed my rifle at it. My only thought was if I didn't take this thing down, it would take me down, and it looked powerful enough to break right through that screen door and get my kids. So I did what I had to do, and I took the shot. I hit this thing right in the chest. I know I did. I saw the blood splatter. But it didn't faze this thing. All it did was piss it off. It made this wild screaming noise. That noise made my blood run cold. It sounded angry, not hurt. I felt that scream in my chest. Then, it pushed up with its front two legs, and stood on the back two. Now this thing was a couple feet taller than me. We're talking over the 8-foot mark. If I thought this thing was muscular when it was on all fours, then I couldn't even describe it when it was standing up. This thing looked like an honest-to-God werewolf, straight out of a scary movie. Everything about it screamed power and muscle. I didn't stop to get a better description. I was too busy staring up at the face of this beast. Into those glowing eyes. At a glance, though, it stood on its back legs like a dog would. I have never seen anything look so angry in all my life. And keep in mind, I've been married for decades. This thing looked like it wanted to obliterate me. I was frozen for a brief second, in awe of what I was looking at. How could something like this even exist? It screeched at me again. It made this high-pitched whooping sound, and then started yapping. Even that noise was deafening. I wanted to cover my ears, but that would mean I would have to drop the gun. I fired again, only about 20 feet away, and I hit it in the chest again. Still, nothing. This thing wasn't fazed by my bullets. And then, it felt like time slowed down as I realized that I might not be able to take this creature down. It was one of those times where you think you're going to die, and everything flashes through your brain at once. I could hear my kids screaming at the window. I could hear this thing growling. I could even hear Sam finally coming to our aid and barking like crazy. If 2 shots at close range didn't faze this thing, how was I going to stop it from killing all of us? Then this thing turned and took off, still on 2 legs. Faster than I have ever seen anything move. Not only was it fast, but the strides it took with those legs had to be at least twice my own. It ran down the road, and I ran back inside. When this thing was running off, it was still making that yapping noise, but it just sounded so angry. The kids were hysterical. I was damn near hysterical. All 3 of us were crying. I still was afraid that it was going to come back. I grabbed my shotgun and I went back outside to make sure it was gone. About 5 minutes later, Cindy came flying down the road. She was hauling ass in her truck, barreling towards the driveway. She barely put it in park before she hopped out. She looked terrified and had the rifle she carries in her hands. I just knew that she saw it too. She ran up to me and told me that she just saw a werewolf. If I hadn't been so terrified by what I just went through with the kids, I would have laughed at her expression. But I knew what she was talking about, because I saw it too. I told her that it was at the house, and that I shot it, and it ran off. She was worried about the kids, but I told her they were fine. I asked her where she saw this creature, and which way it was going when it was running.
My name is Cindy, wife of Jimmy. You've already heard his encounter with the Dogman creature. Now I'll tell you mine. Like Jimmy said, this took place in Ohio. It was in 1982, and it was right by our home. I wasn't at home when Jimmy had his experience. I was down at the ranch working with a horse that had colic. I'm a large animal vet and often go to work after Jimmy gets home, so I can help around the local area. I was raised in the country. I'm a country girl, and I know how to identify animals. That's why I know what I saw that night wasn't normal. That night, I was driving down the dirt road that connects the ranch to our home. As I was driving, I noticed what looked like a person in the distance running towards me. But the closer it got, the more it dawned on me that this was not a person. It was some kind of creature. It stood about 8 feet tall. As it ran, it looked like a dog would run, but on 2 legs. The term is called digitigrade, where they stand on their toes and their hock or ankle is pointed out in the air. It was covered in shaggy, grayish-brown hair, and it had long arms that went almost down to its knees. As it ran, it swung its arms back and forth. The whole musculature of this thing was massive. The thighs were gigantic, and so were the calves. But the most massive thing about it was its chest. It was extremely muscular and wide. The thickness of the fur reminded me of a grizzly bear, but the shape of its head was like a wolf or a dog. It had a long muzzle, and the mouth was open as it ran. I could see long canine teeth. It definitely looked like a predatory animal. And it had these big eyes that looked like they were equipped for hunting at night and gave off an orange glow. The creature was moving incredibly fast. It would clock at about 40 miles per hour, I would think. I know wolves range somewhere in the 35 mile per hour zone, but this thing was moving faster than a wolf could. It was moving faster than any animal that I had ever seen. It also seemed to be headed straight for me, though not on a direct collision course. It was off to the side of the road, so I had no fear of it running into my truck. Eventually, this thing ran straight past me, and as it did, it turned its head, and I saw an expression that looked like anger, and also a fearlessness that actually made me shiver. Growing up in the country, I've had my fair share of run-ins with wild animals, but this thing frightened me more than any animal I've ever been in contact with. I had the window down as it was hot that evening, and in the millisecond that it took to pass this thing, given the speeds we were both going, I was able to hear it release a sound like a growl. I screamed. Then I slammed on the gas. I was very close to home, and all I can think of was my children. I looked back towards the creature in time to see it do this running leap, and then dart into the forest. And as it went, in almost the blink of an eye, I thought I heard another growl or roar coming from the forest, but it sounded like it was moving further away from me then. I raced home. I needed to check on my family. I sped all the way back. When I pulled up a couple of minutes later, I saw Jimmy outside with guns in his hand, and I just knew that that thing had already paid a visit to my home. I told Jimmy what I had seen, and he told me what he had been through. I was relieved to hear the kids were safe. We decided that it would be best if we went to a friend's house in town that night. We ended up staying for 2 days, and were very cautious when we came back home. In fact, for an entire year we were cautious and wouldn't let the kids play outside on their own. Anytime they were out there, we would be out there with them with our rifles, watching them play, ready to defend them if we saw that creature again. Thankfully, we never did.
We actually think we chased this creature off, and that maybe that was the first time it was in the area. Maybe it was trying to stake this land as its own territory. Hopefully it knows the danger that humans pose to it, and it will stay away from humans and not cause any harm to us or itself.
It's intriguing in a way to think that there is a creature like that out there, but terrifying as well. Enough that I would never want to experience anything like that again. Today we're still in this old house, but it's been decades since that thing came calling.
With this encounter, we were very lucky. We were able to scare this thing off, and never have the misfortune of seeing it again. From what I've read and listened to here on YouTube, there are some people that aren't so lucky.